So Giancarlo Esposito says that him playing Professor X and Denzel Washington playing Magneto would be great. And I agree. It wouldn't just be great, it'd be amazing. These past few X-Men films has been trash, to put it nicely. The last really good X-Men movie was probably Logan, starring Hugh Jackman. That wasn't an X-Men movie. That was a Wolverine movie. But Sir Patrick Stewart played Professor X in that as an older Professor X, and that movie was excellent, excellent. But yeah, the X-Men movies do need a shot in the arm. The problem is aging and time. Uh, Denzel is 69 years old, and Giancarlo is 65. Now, to be fair, when Sir Patrick Stewart and Sir Ian McKellen played Magneto and Professor X in the X-Men movies 20 years ago, they were both in their early 60s. So Denzel and Giancarlo are a little bit older than those guys. But it's not unprecedented that guys in their 60s can't play these roles. And to be honest, Giancarlo and Denzel actually did work together, I think, once, but it was like kind of, sort of, because they were both in Mo Better Blues. But Giancarlo had a smaller role in that film. He was coming off Do the Right Thing as Bugging Out. And then we had Mo Better Blues. And then when you saw Giancarlo in that movie, you think, oh, okay, Giancarlo's back. But it really wasn't his film this time. It was really about Denzel and Wesley Snipes. And if you've never seen the film before, it's almost like a Magneto Professor X thing, where Wesley's character was a jazz artist who wanted to play the jazz that made money, and Denzel's character was a jazz artist who was more about the purity of jazz and keeping that legacy alive. And they're push and pull, just like Professor X and Magneto, which was based on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. If you don't know the story, Stan Lee, when he created it, based those characters on Martin Luther King. That would be Professor X and Malcolm X, who was Magneto, and they're both in their ways, the ways that they saw being the mutants in the world, and the ways that they either want to be accepted or to fight against it. Malcolm X was more by any means necessary, which is Magneto, and Professor X is like, we need to bring everybody together and live in harmony, which is Professor X. And in some ways, if Giancarlo and Denzel played those roles, you're really taking it back to the essence of what Stan Lee actually wanted or desired to do back then in comic books. But back then, you couldn't really pull off those black characters like that. It wasn't until Black Panther till things kind of took shape. So, timing. Denzel is always working. And in spring 2025, he's going to do Othello on Broadway with Jake Gyllenhaal. So that's going to take up a lot of his time. Giancarlo, ever since Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, he's been busy. He's been a Mandalorian. He's been in a lot of different shows, and he has his own show coming up on AMC. So these guys are extremely busy. So if they did do a project like this, they would have to film it in late 2025 at the earliest, and I don't think that's going to happen. And you got to think, someplace in Marvel Studios, they say there is a script focusing on just Magneto and Professor X. There has to be. There has to be a script. And they had to be, at one point, there had to be a script when you had either Sir Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart playing Magneto and Professor X, or when Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy was playing the younger version of those characters. And they kind of did it with First Class and a couple of those other films. That was just about those two. It's not about all the X-Men. It was just about Magneto and Professor X. So you got to think there's a script like that lying around. Now, if it is, and they don't have time to produce it, maybe they can go to Broadway with it. Because Marvel, the only Broadway show they've had was the Spider-Man Broadway show that I think was produced by The Edge and Bono from U2. And that show tanked. and I think a two-man show with Denzel Washington and Giancarlo Esposito playing Magneto and Professor X would be kind of amazing. I think people would sit there and watch these two wonderful actors bring those characters to life on stage. That would be a whole different audience to Broadway. From different, like, you bring an African American audience in, you bring a comic book audience in, and then you have the regular Broadway audience in. I think that would be a winner, but I doubt that's going to happen. So, Giancarlo, it's a great idea. I just wish this was 2014 instead of 2024. Because I think if this was 2014, I think we would have a shot in this. But because it's 2024, I don't know we're going to get to it. Because sooner or later, Denzel's going to retire. I don't think it's anytime soon. Like, Denzel's an actor's actor. Giancarlo is too, but Denzel's an actor's actor. And just like how I mentioned, Ian McKellen, like he was on Graham Norton recently, and he was talking about how doing a Broadway. He's doing a theater production, I think in Europe, and I think probably in Britain. And he's in his 80s, and I think Denzel's going to be the same way. Like, I hate to say that Denzel's going to actually die on stage, but I think he loves acting so much that he probably will die on stage because he just loves the craft so much. He doesn't have to do theater. He doesn't have to do Othello, but he is because he loves theater. So, Giancarlo, thank you for the idea. Marvel, I think you should do it. Make it Earth 1970 so the comic nerds don't get upset by this. And just say on the Earth someplace, Denzel and Giancarlo's Magneto and Professor X. And it doesn't even matter who it is. Like, Denzel can play Professor X and Giancarlo can play Magneto. It doesn't matter. Because when you're great like these two are, doesn't matter who plays what.